He married his own teenage sister, a sentence that cuts through the silence of Appalachia like a rusted blade. It is a truth buried in the cold soil of Tennessee's forgotten hills, a truth whispered for decades but rarely spoken aloud. This is the story of the Carters, a family bound not only by blood but by shadows, secrets, and sins that stretched across generations. What began as an isolated household tucked deep within the hills would unravel into one of the most unsettling scandals in Tennessee's hidden history. The year was 1969. America was landing men on the moon. Cities were boiling with protest, and the counterculture was reshaping an entire generation. But in the remote folds of Monroe County, far removed from television sets and city streets, life followed a rhythm older than progress itself. Here, in a valley locals called Hollow Creek, the Carter family lived cut off both by choice and by shame. The patriarch, James Carter, a stern man of 53, raised his 5 children after the early death of his wife. The oldest, William, had just turned 20, already hardened by long days of field labor and silence. Beneath him were Martha, 16, Helen, 14, Samuel, 11, and the youngest, little Annie, only 7 years old. From the outside, they were just another poor Appalachian family fighting for survival in a world that seemed to leave mountain folk behind. But inside their weather-beaten cabin, generations of secrecy brewed. The Carters were no strangers to bending the rules of kinship. James himself was the son of a cousin marriage, and his own wife, now long buried beneath an oak on the hillside, had been a second cousin. In isolated valleys like Hollow Creek, bloodlines often twisted back on themselves. But what happened between William and Martha was not simply a matter of tradition or survival. It was something darker. The first signs. Neighbors rarely saw the Carter children except on Sundays when they walked the long miles to a worn, clapboard church. It was Reverend John Daniels who first noticed Martha's absences. By the fall of 1969, she had stopped attending Sunday service altogether. Her once bright eyes, he recalled later, seemed to vanish into silence. William always had some excuse, Daniels told investigators years later. She wasn't feeling well. She had chores. She was helping with Annie, but something in his tone, something in his eyes, made me uneasy. Those suspicions would prove justified. Because by the winter, Martha's figure began to change. She wore layered dresses, even in the bitter cold, wrapping shawls around her frame in ways that seemed unnatural. Her sisters whispered. Samuel, too young to understand, noticed the tension in the house. But it was Helen, just 14, who pieced it together. Her testimony would later shake the valley. I saw William take her by the arm in the barn, Helen would write years later in a statement kept sealed for decades. He spoke low, like he was warning her. And when Martha looked at me, her face looked like she was trapped, like she couldn't breathe. The marriage by spring of 1970, rumors spread. Martha, barely 17, was pregnant. No outsider had ever seen her with a boy. No one had called at the cabin. And still, James Carter, their father, gave no outward sign of concern. It was the preacher, Daniels, who pressed the family for an explanation. He confronted James one Sunday after church when William stood tall beside his younger sister. "Who's the father?" Daniels demanded. James looked past him, his jaw set like stone. William's hand rested firmly on Martha's shoulder, an almost possessive weight. "She's his wife now," James said at last. "Ain't nobody else's business." The hollow fell silent. It was the kind of declaration that would never have been tolerated in towns beyond the ridge. But in Hollow Creek, where lawmen rarely climbed the muddy roads and traditions often blurred, there was no one bold enough to challenge the Carters outright. And so William married Martha, his own sister, in a crude ceremony held inside the Carter cabin. No preacher officiated, no license was issued. James himself declared it binding. For Martha, it was not love but captivity. The silence of the hills. The pregnancy carried on through the long summer months. Neighbors whispered when they saw William leading his visibly pregnant sister down the road for supplies, his grip firm, his face unreadable. Some families avoided them altogether. Others excused it as mountain ways, a phrase often used to shrug off what they could not face. Only one person, a schoolteacher named Emily Lawson, refused to look away. She had taught both Martha and Helen at the one-room schoolhouse in earlier years and had grown fond of the girls. When Martha disappeared from lessons, Emily tried visiting the Carter cabin. They wouldn't let me near her, Lawson told reporters decades later. William answered the door every time. His eyes were cold and his voice was final. She's fine, he'd say. But I could hear movement inside. I could hear crying. Emily reported her concerns to the county sheriff, but nothing came of it. In 1970, in remote mountain pockets, the law often turned a blind eye to what it considered family matters. Martha's child in October of 1970. When those outsiders came to the Carter home, they saw more than just grief. They saw Martha, thin and hollow-eyed, holding her infant son. They saw William standing protectively at her side, calling her his wife. And they saw James staring out the window, unwilling to speak. The sheriff, John Avery, later recalled, "I knew something was off. The way that boy clung to her shoulder, the way she wouldn't look anyone in the eye. I'd been in these hills long enough to recognize the weight of silence. But back then, there was little appetite for digging too deep." Still, whispers spread beyond Hollow Creek, and once rumors reached the ears of state authorities, the Carter family could no longer hide. The investigation begins. It started quietly, a social worker sent from Knoxville, arriving at the Carter cabin in the spring of 1971. Her name was Linda Harper, a young woman new to the job, unprepared for the darkness she would uncover. Harper arrived on a muddy April afternoon. She expected resistance, perhaps even hostility. What she found instead was worse fear. Martha barely spoke, Harper would later write in her notes. She kept her eyes down. William answered every question, his hand never leaving her arm. He told me they were married, that their father approved. He dared me to challenge him. Harper's visit triggered a chain of events that would soon pull the Carter scandal into the open. But in that first encounter, she realized something chilling. Martha did not see herself as free. She saw herself as bound by family, by blood, by shame too heavy to fight. And so the secret of the Carter family, hidden in the Tennessee hills, began to crack. The Carter scandal might have remained just a whisper in Hollow Creek if not for that knock on the cabin door in April of 1971. Linda Harper, the young social worker from Knoxville, had no idea that her visit would ignite a storm. But once she stepped inside the Carter home, the air shifted. She saw it in Martha's trembling hands as she cradled her infant. She saw it in the bruises half hidden beneath her sleeves. And she saw it in William's unblinking stare, that kind of gaze that dared the world to question him. "They're my family." "They're mine," William told Harper when she pressed about Martha's well-being. His voice was low, steady, and edged with threat. "Ain't no law gonna tell me how to run my house." It was a statement Harper couldn't ignore. Breaking the silence when Harper returned to Knoxville, she filed her first official report. It was cautious, almost tentative, but the words carried weight. Subject: possible incestuous relationship between William Carter, 20, and Martha Carter, 17, now presenting as husband and wife, evidence of coercion suspected. Infant male present, possibly product of said relationship. Her supervisor balked. "You don't go stirring things like this in the mountains," he warned her. "These families close ranks. You push too hard, you'll make enemies for life." But Harper refused to let it go. She returned to Hollow Creek weeks later, this time with a deputy by her side. The Carters received her coldly. James sat silent in his chair. William stood in the doorway, his shoulders squared, daring them to step further inside. And Martha's eyes flickered just once. Harper caught it, a plea buried beneath fear. That single look was enough. The sheriff's reluctance. Sheriff John Avery had lived his entire life in Monroe County. He knew every dirt road, every hollow, and every family secret not meant for outsiders. When the call came from Knoxville asking him to look into the Carters, his first reaction was hesitation. Incest in the hills wasn't unheard of, Avery admitted later. But making it official? That was another matter. Folks didn't forgive outsiders meddling in their bloodlines. Still, duty compelled him. In June of 1971, Avery made his first formal visit to the Carter property. He found William splitting wood by the barn, sweat glistening on his back. Martha was inside, rocking her infant son. James, as always, sat by the window, his silence thicker than stone. I asked William Plain, Avery recalled. Was he married to his sister? He didn't flinch, just said, "She's mine." Always has been, like he was telling me the sun rose in the east. No shame, no hesitation. Avery left that day shaken. He filed a preliminary report but stopped short of making an arrest. Without a complaint from Martha, without physical evidence of force, the law's hands were tied. But the story refused to stay buried. Whispers in the Valley. By the summer of 1971, Hollow Creek was buzzing. The Carters had become a symbol of something even locals struggled to put into words. Children whispered about the baby born of sin. Women muttered that Martha's pale, haunted look reminded them of ghosts. He told her she was his property, Helen recalled. Said God himself had chosen her for him. She never argued, not out loud. But at night I could hear her cry. By late summer, Martha was pregnant again. The news shattered what little resolve she had left. Helen described one evening when Martha whispered through tears, "I can't do this again. I can't bring another child into this." But when Helen begged her to leave, Martha shook her head. "He'll find me. He'll always find me." That fear wasn't unfounded. William often carried a shotgun slung over his shoulder, even inside the house. He told Martha that if she ever tried to run, the hills would keep her. Harper's return. Linda Harper refused to let the case die. She returned in August of 1971 with a new plan to speak to Helen privately. If Martha couldn't find her voice, perhaps her younger sister could. Harper caught Helen while she was gathering water from the creek. Away from William's watchful eyes, Helen broke down. "She told me everything," Harper later said. "The threats, the fear, the pregnancy. She begged me to take Martha away." With Helen's testimony, Harper finally had enough leverage to push the county to act. She met with Sheriff Avery again, this time demanding intervention. "You want me to walk up that mountain and take a girl from her family against her will?" Avery asked. "I want you to save her life," Harper shot back. Reluctantly, Avery agreed. The raid. On September 12, 1971, lawmen climbed the muddy road to Hollow Creek with warrants in hand. Sheriff Avery led the group, flanked by deputies and a county doctor. Harper was there too, her heart pounding. When they arrived, William was waiting on the porch, shotgun in hand. "You ain't talking her," he warned. His voice was calm, almost too calm. "Martha," Harper called out, stepping forward. "We're here to help you. You don't have to stay." For a long moment, silence hung over the hollow. Then Martha appeared in the doorway, her baby in her arms, tears streaming down her face. She didn't move toward Harper. She didn't move at all. William tightened his grip on the shotgun. Deputies raised their rifles. The standoff lasted minutes that felt like hours. Finally, James Carter, silent for so long, spoke. "Put it down, son," he rasped. His voice cracked with years of silence. "Ain't no winning this." William's hands shook, his jaw clenched. But slowly he lowered the weapon. Martha collapsed into Harper's arms. The aftermath. The Carter scandal exploded in Tennessee newspapers. Headlines screamed of "Brother weds sister in Appalachian Hollow." Reporters swarmed Monroe County. Photographs of the cabin, of William's stony face, of Martha's gaunt frame filled front pages. The family was split apart. William was arrested and charged with incest, coercion, and unlawful marriage. James faced charges of neglect and complicity. The children were placed under state care. For Martha, freedom was bittersweet. She carried not only her infant son but also another child growing inside her. She was relocated to Knoxville, where she lived under supervision. Her story whispered about but rarely told in her own words. William remained unrepentant. In court, he declared, "She was mine. She'll always be mine. No law can change that." His words chilled the courtroom. The Carter scandal had become more than a family matter. It had become a mirror reflecting the darkest corners of Appalachian isolation, where silence, shame, and secrecy could fester for generations. Seeds for Part 3, but the story didn't end with William's arrest. The scandal unraveled deeper truths about the Carter bloodline patterns of cousin marriages, whispered allegations of abuse stretching back generations, and a community complicit in silence. And for Martha, survival was only the beginning. Her testimony, her children, and her haunted memories would shape the next chapter of the Carter family's cursed history. The arrest of William Carter in the fall of 1971 should have been the end of the scandal. A brother imprisoned, a sister freed, and a valley's dark whisper dragged into the light. But the truth of Hollow Creek ran deeper than a single crime. The Carter family was not just a house of secrets, it was a bloodline marked by patterns of silence, control, and forbidden ties that stretched back generations. As investigators combed through the wreckage of the Carter household, they discovered that William and Martha S. union was not an isolated event but the latest link in a long and twisted chain. The Carter bloodline, when genealogists were called in to document the Carter family tree, the findings unsettled even seasoned officials. James Carter, the patriarch, had married his second cousin. His own parents had been first cousins, and his grandfather? A product of another cousin marriage, one never legally registered but well known in Hollow Creek's oral history. It was a web that folded in on itself, looping tighter with each generation until boundaries blurred. Outsiders might have called it incest. Locals often dismissed it as mountain ways. But to investigators it painted a chilling picture. Isolation wasn't just a fact of geography, it was a prison of blood. The Carter scandal, shocking as it was, seemed less like an aberration and more like the inevitable consequence of decades spent cut off from the world. William's defense. When William stood trial in Knoxville, the courtroom overflowed with spectators and journalists. Some came for justice. Others came for spectacle. Dressed in plain work clothes, William showed no remorse. When asked if he had married his sister, he answered without hesitation, "Damn right I did, she's mine." Always has been. When the prosecutor demanded why, William leaned forward, his eyes dark and unblinking. "You people think you know better. You think laws written in some city mean a damn in these hills? Families take care of their own. Ain't no shame in that. My granddaddy did the same, my daddy did the same. And I'll not hang my head for following the same ways." The courtroom fell into stunned silence. Martha, sitting at the back with her infant in her arms, broke down sobbing. It was not the words of a man seeking forgiveness. It was the creed of someone raised to believe blood itself was destiny. Martha's testimony. For weeks, Martha resisted speaking. She had been sheltered in Knoxville under supervision, her second pregnancy hidden from reporters who clamored for details. Officials worried that forcing her to testify would break her. But in November of 1971, she took the stand. Her voice was soft, trembling at first. She described the years of control, how William had stepped into their mother's place after her death, how their father's silence had allowed it, how fear had kept her bound. "He told me I was his," Martha whispered through tears. "He said God made me for him, and I believed him because I didn't know any different. I thought maybe that was just the way it was supposed to be." Her words cut through the courtroom. For the first time, outsiders glimpsed not just the crime, but the suffocating isolation that had made it possible. When the prosecutor asked if she loved William, Martha shook her head violently. "I was his prisoner," she cried, "not his wife." The verdict. In December of 1971, William Carter was convicted of incest, unlawful marriage, and coercion. He was sentenced to 15 years in state prison. His father, James, received a lesser sentence for neglect and complicity. But justice, though delivered on paper, felt hollow. For Hollow Creek, the stain remained. Neighbors whispered that William was punished not for what he did, but for daring to flaunt it before outsiders. "He should have kept it quiet," one old farmer muttered to a reporter. For Martha, the verdict was not freedom. She still bore the weight of William's child growing inside her. She still carried the shame stamped on her by neighbors who saw her not as a victim but as part of the scandal. Freedom, she realized, was not a door opened by law. It was something she would have to carve out for herself. A valley of secrets. As reporters dug deeper, Hollow Creek itself became a subject of scrutiny. The Carter family wasn't alone. Records showed other families in the valley with tangled bloodlines, marriages between cousins, and whispered rumors of unions that blurred even closer ties. Emily Lawson, the schoolteacher who had first suspected the Carters, spoke to a journalist. "You have to understand, these hollers are like closed worlds. Outsiders don't come in and insiders don't go out. Children grow up only knowing their cousins, their kin. Sometimes that's all there is. And when fathers look away, when pastors refuse to speak, these cycles don't break. They just keep turning. The Carter scandal had cracked one family open, but beneath it lay an entire culture of silence, shaped by isolation, poverty, and generations of secrets. Martha's children. In February of 1972, Martha gave birth to her second child, another boy. Born inside a state care facility, he became both a reminder of trauma and a symbol of resilience. Social workers debated whether Martha could raise the children herself. Some argued she was too fragile, too haunted by her past. Others insisted separating her from her children would only deepen the wound. Martha, despite her brokenness, fought fiercely. "They are mine," she told Harper, "not his. Not anybody else's, mine." In the end, she was allowed to keep them, though always under supervision. She lived in a small rented home outside Knoxville, trying to piece together a life while newspapers still printed her name. Every time she walked to the market, whispers followed. Some pitied her, others judged her. Few understood the depth of her survival. William in prison. Meanwhile, William became a dark legend behind prison walls. Fellow inmates gave him the nickname Brother Husband. Some mocked him. Others, disturbingly, admired his defiance. He never expressed regret. In letters seized by authorities, he wrote, "They can lock me away, but they can't change who I am. Martha was mine, and she always be mine. One day I'll walk free and she see." Those letters were never delivered to Martha, but knowing he was still alive, still unrepentant, cast a long shadow over her attempts at rebuilding. Harper's fight. For Linda Harper, the Carter case became a mission. She testified before state committees about the dangers of unchecked isolation in rural Appalachia. She pushed for stronger child protection laws and better access to education and health care in remote counties, but not everyone welcomed her efforts. Local leaders accused her of smearing the mountain people, of painting them as savages for the entertainment of outsiders. She received threats. Her car was vandalized twice. Still, she refused to back down. "If one Martha can be saved, then it's worth it," she told a colleague. Her persistence made her a target, but it also made her a hero to some. The scandal's reach. By 1973, the Carter scandal had become a case study cited in sociology journals, debated in churches, and whispered about in universities. For many Americans, it was their first glimpse into the hidden struggles of isolated Appalachian communities. But for Hollow Creek, it was a curse. Outsiders flooded the valley, reporters, researchers, even curious travelers. The community that had survived by silence now found itself dissected by strangers. Some families fled. Others doubled down on secrecy. And the Carters, once one of the valley's largest clans, fractured beyond repair. The ghost of Hollow Creek. Years later, locals claim that the Carter cabin stood abandoned, its windows broken, its roof sagging. Children dared each other to creep inside at night. They swore they could hear a baby crying or the sound of William's angry voice echoing from the shadows. Whether folklore or truth, the Carter scandal had taken on a life larger than fact. It became a ghost story, a warning whispered to daughters and sons. "Don, let the hills keep you silent." Toward the final chapter, yet the story was not finished. William still lived, his sentence ticking. When the prison gates opened in 1986, William Carter walked free. He was 35 years old, hardened by 15 years behind bars, and as unrepentant as the day he was led away in shackles. "Y'all can't change blood," he told a reporter who caught him outside. "Blood is stronger than bars." For Martha, the news of his release hit like a thunderclap. By then, she was 32, living quietly outside Knoxville with her 2 sons. She had built a fragile semblance of normalcy, working at a textile mill, attending church, trying to give her boys the life she had been denied. But the shadow of Hollow Creek still followed her. Every mention of William's name reopened old wounds. Every whisper in town reminded her that freedom was never absolute. William didn't return to Hollow Creek immediately. He drifted for months, staying with distant cousins, picking up odd jobs, drinking heavily. But eventually, inevitably, the pull of the valley brought him back. The Carter cabin was gone, its roof collapsed, its walls overtaken by vines. But William stood before it like a man staring at a shrine. "Home," he muttered, though nothing of home remained. Locals avoided him. To some, he was a pariah. To others, a dark legend returned. Children whispered about the brother-husband, too young to understand the full truth but old enough to sense fear in their parents' voices. Martha's fear when Martha learned William was back in Hollow Creek. She couldn't sleep. Her sons, now teenagers, knew only fragments of their past, but they understood their mother's terror. "Is he gonna come for us?" her oldest asked. Martha had no answer. She had spent years telling herself William's grip had ended in 1971, but she knew him too well. His obsession wasn't the kind that faded. She confided in Linda Harper, now a veteran social worker and advocate. Harper urged her to seek protection, to file for a restraining order, but Martha shook her head. "A paper won't stop him," she whispered. The confrontation had happened on a gray October evening in 1987. Martha was leaving the mill when she saw him. William stood across the street, hands in his pockets, staring. He didn't approach, he didn't speak. He just watched her until she hurried away. It wasn't the last time. He appeared outside her church on the edge of the grocery parking lot, once even at the fence of her small rented home, always silent, always staring. He wanted her to know he was there, Harper said later. It was control without words. The same control he'd held in that cabin years before. Finally, Martha broke. She went to the police, trembling, and told them everything. But they found no grounds for arrest. "He hasn't touched you," they said. "He hasn't threatened you." The law, once again, felt powerless against silence. The final choice on a cold December night in 1987, Martha packed a suitcase. She gathered her sons, now 14 and 16, and told them they were leaving. "We can't stay here," she said. "He'll never stop." They drove east, leaving Knoxville behind, crossing into North Carolina before dawn. For the first time, Martha felt the weight of Hollow Creek lifting from her shoulders. She settled in a small town near Asheville under a new name, working long shifts but living without the constant dread of William's shadow. Her boys grew into men, carrying the scars of their origins but forging lives of their own. And Martha, fragile, haunted, but unbroken, finally carved out a freedom that no law, no valley, and no brother could take from her. William's end. As for William, his life unraveled. He drifted further into drink, isolated in the hollow that had once sheltered him. Neighbors found him in 1993, slumped against the collapsed wall of the old Carter cabin, dead of liver failure at 42. There was no funeral, no marker, just a shallow grave near the oak where his mother had been buried decades before. For many, it was a fitting end, the cabin that had held so many secrets becoming his final resting place. But the valley didn't forget. His name lingered, carried in whispers, etched into the folklore of Hollow Creek. Martha's legacy. Martha never returned to Hollow Creek. She lived quietly, raising her sons, telling them only pieces of the truth when they were old enough to bear it. "She taught us strength," her eldest later said. "She taught us that survival isn't just about staying alive. It's about finding a way to live after the worst has happened." Martha passed away in 2011 at the age of 61. Her sons stood at her funeral, speaking not of scandal, but of resilience. Few outside their small circle knew the full weight of her story. But those who did saw her as more than a victim. She was a survivor who had carried the burden of a family's darkest legacy and still managed